When you hear the name Cleopatra, what image forms in your mind? A stunning queen reclining on a golden chaise, shrouded in silk and mystery. Hollywood has immortalized her as a femme fatale, beautiful, cunning, and manipulative. But this portrayal barely scratches the surface. What if Cleopatra wasn't just a symbol of beauty, but one of the greatest minds of her age? What if she wasn't just Rome's exotic queen, but a ruler who navigated one of the most dangerous political landscapes in history, and almost won? In this video, we'll explore Cleopatra's remarkable education, her linguistic mastery, and her strategic genius, not just in love, but in politics, economics, and warfare. Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty in 69 BC, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. Most Ptolemaic rulers were known more for decadence than wisdom, but Cleopatra broke the mold. From a young age, she was groomed to lead. Her education at the Great Library of Alexandria, the most advanced center of learning in the ancient world, was rigorous and wide-ranging. She studied literature, philosophy, astronomy, geometry, medicine, and history. The influence of Greek thinkers like Plato and Aristotle shaped her analytical and political thinking. But Cleopatra's education wasn't just academic. She was trained in the art of persuasion and oration, learning how to sway public opinion and navigate complex legal systems. She learned firsthand the intricacies of diplomacy by observing the Egyptian court's dealings with Rome and other foreign powers. Her early exposure to political maneuvering shaped her into a sharp, adaptable ruler. She was being prepared not to marry into power, but to wield it herself. Cleopatra was reportedly fluent in at least 9 languages. She could speak Greek, the language of the Ptolemies, Egyptian, the language of the native people, as well as Latin, Aramaic, and likely Hebrew, Persian, Arabic, and others spoken by neighboring territories. While her predecessors relied on translators, Cleopatra could communicate directly with foreign dignitaries, generals, and priests. This gave her an immense strategic advantage. She could read diplomatic subtext, negotiate with precision, and build trust without intermediaries. By speaking Egyptian, she did something no Ptolemaic ruler had done for centuries. She embraced the people she ruled. She presented herself not just as their queen, but as one of them. Her fluency allowed her to serve as the high priestess of Isis, participate in religious ceremonies, and solidify her legitimacy in the eyes of both the elite and the common class. Language wasn't just a skill, it was a political weapon she wielded with mastery. Cleopatra's reign was anything but smooth. Egypt was crumbling economically, torn by internal conflict, and increasingly threatened by Rome's imperial ambitions. But Cleopatra didn't retreat. She adapted. When her father Ptolemy III died, she initially co-ruled with her brother Ptolemy III. But soon, they were at war. Cleopatra was forced into exile but returned, not with an army, but with Julius Caesar. Here's where her genius truly shines. Rather than beg Caesar for help, she engineered a theatrical moment that changed the course of history. She had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled inside a carpet or linen sack, depending on the source. When unrolled before him, she presented herself not as a desperate queen, but as an equal. She knew Caesar was a man who admired boldness and intelligence, and she gave him both. Their alliance wasn't just romantic, it was political. With Caesar's military support, she defeated her brother's forces and reclaimed the throne. Later, when Caesar was assassinated, she aligned with Antony, Caesar's most powerful supporter. Again, Cleopatra didn't just seduce, she negotiated. She hosted Antony in lavish Egyptian style, appealing to his vanity and ambitions. She promised resources, money, ships, grain, and troops, in exchange for the preservation of Egypt's sovereignty. Together, they formed a political and military partnership that threatened Octavian, Caesar's heir. Cleopatra's mistake wasn't poor strategy, it was betting on the wrong Roman. And even then, she nearly won. The Battle of Actium was a devastating loss, but even in the face of ruin, Cleopatra kept fighting, raising fleets and negotiating behind the scenes. She only chose death when all political options had collapsed. Her suicide, often portrayed as a romantic gesture, was her final act of resistance. She refused to be paraded in chains through Rome. Cleopatra was also a capable economist and military planner. During her reign, she stabilized Egypt's faltering economy. She devalued currency strategically to control inflation and implemented new tax systems to boost state revenue. Egypt had long suffered under corrupt officials and mismanagement, but Cleopatra's hands-on approach improved trade, agriculture, and revenue collection. She also invested heavily in Egypt's navy, understanding that sea power was critical in the Mediterranean world. Her ships were not just defensive tools, they were symbols of Egypt's independence and reach. During her alliance with Antony, Cleopatra personally oversaw the outfitting of over 200 warships, some built specifically for speed and maneuverability in battle. Her ability to finance armies, supply fleets, and support her Roman allies was not due to Roman generosity. It was her own strategic handling of Egypt's wealth. In a world where kings and queens often left economics to advisors, Cleopatra took charge. She understood that money was just as powerful as armies, and she used both to maintain Egypt's position on the geopolitical chessboard. Cleopatra also mastered the use of image and propaganda. She cultivated her persona as the living embodiment of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of motherhood and magic. In portraits, coins, and ceremonies, she fused the iconography of both Greek and Egyptian traditions. This allowed her to appeal to both audiences, Greek elites and native Egyptians, strengthening her image as a divine and legitimate ruler. Her public appearances were theatrical and calculated. Ancient writers describe her entrance to meet Mark Antony as almost divine, sailing up the Cydnus River on a gilded barge with purple sails, dressed as Isis, surrounded by attendants dressed as cupids and deities. This wasn't vanity, it was psychological warfare. She understood the power of spectacle and used it to captivate her audience, be it a Roman general or her own people. Even her famous beauty may have been part of this strategy. Coins minted in her reign show a strong, commanding face, not a conventional beauty, but a deliberate image of power and confidence. She crafted her persona not to please men, but to project authority. So why, after all this, is Cleopatra remembered primarily for her love life? The answer lies in Roman propaganda. After defeating her, Octavian, who would become Emperor Augustus, needed to justify a civil war. He framed Cleopatra as the foreign temptress who corrupted Antony and endangered Rome. Poets, historians, and politicians adopted this narrative, reducing Cleopatra to a dangerous beauty. Over centuries, this image evolved. Shakespeare, Renaissance painters, and modern films all portrayed her as seductive and mysterious, often ignoring her intellect, her policies, and her daring leadership. But slowly, that's changing. More scholars and creators are beginning to view her through a different lens, not as a tragic lover, but as one of the most capable rulers of the ancient world. The answer is yes, undeniably. Cleopatra was a rare figure in history, a ruler who combined intelligence, charisma, and courage in equal measure. She outwitted her rivals, led a nation through crisis, mastered foreign languages, revived a declining economy, commanded fleets, negotiated with Rome's most powerful leaders, and made herself into a living goddess. She was not just a queen, she was a force. Her life was not a tragedy of love, but of legacy, a brilliant mind distorted by centuries of male-dominated history. It's time we remember Cleopatra, not as a seductress, but as a strategist, a scholar, and a sovereign who dared to challenge the greatest empire in the world, and almost won.